Since DLSS 3 competitor is taking a long time to release, and probably by then more games will have DLSS 3, so frame generation, possibly other features will be added. How much value do you think it adds to NVIDIA cards? So what premium should you pay for frame generation and DLSS in general, I suppose? It also seems to improve performance on bad PC ports. Can do. Obviously, it's not supposed to be a selling point. Did I read that right? But the recent issue on AMD-sponsored titles got me thinking a lot about this. Well, it's definitely meant to be the selling point. So I think that... Yeah. I read that right, didn't I? Obviously, it's not supposed to be a selling point.
Yeah,
so
what's a selling?
DLSS 3 frame generation is meant to be the selling point on the Ada Lovelace generation, the GeForce 40 series. That's what it's all about.
So I think definitely with DLSS 2, that's now at a point where it's definitely a selling point, especially after looking into it across that number of games. If you're playing at 1440p especially, I think it's definitely significant.
1440p and up.
I mean, relative to FSR, DLSS is better at lower resolutions.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yep.
So I think if you're playing at 1440p, then DLSS is significantly better than FSR. So that's definitely something to think about. If you're gaming at 4K, it's closer, so it's less of a thing to sort of think about in terms of the battle there.
What about 1080p?
At 1080p, it's like, I find it hard to recommend using it.
Okay.
But it's definitely still better on DLSS if you are going to use it.
Yep.
DLSS is better than FSR there as well.
But you recommend just having enough performance to run without an upscaler?
I would be gunning for that if at all possible. So yeah, for DLSS 2, definitely a selling point. I think that's why we often say that AMD GPUs need to be priced a little bit lower than an NVIDIA card for the same level of performance, is because DLSS does offer that better experience. And again, for a lot of mid-range gamers, you're going to be more likely playing at 1440p than 4K, so it makes more impact. I think for DLSS 3, as we've talked about in sort of I think we've made 2 videos on it now, the original video and the updated video. It's still in a position where it's only going to have an impact some of the time. So DLSS generally is going to improve multiplayer and single player gaming in a wide variety of circumstances, whereas DLSS 3, there's a much more limited range. So you have to sort of figure out, are you in the zone or are you not in the zone? And for a gamer like you, Steve, playing Fortnite, you're definitely not in the zone.
I don't play Fortnite, but I like multiplayer games. But yeah, it's... As you're saying, it's not useful for multiplayer gamers, especially sort of more competitive multiplayer gaming. You wouldn't use frame generation, is what you're saying, which is accurate.
Not in its current state.
And then for single player games, it's sort of what frame rate you're at as to how useful it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like what sort of card performance you've got, how CPU limited you are. Like while I would ideally like CPU limits to be resolved not using something like frame generation, if that is the situation that you're in, then yeah, it's great in a game like Flight Simulator, for example. It works really well. It's not a super fast-paced game. Yeah, it's just a great experience there. So again, it really comes down to, with a feature like that, how much you're specifically going to be using it. Same with things like video encoding. NVIDIA always gets talked about as having that superior video encoder, but if you never stream games, you never capture gameplay, I'm someone who basically never uses that feature on my GPU, then it's going to be weighted down. It's not going to be an important thing. So I just really don't care. So that's where I sort of see it. There are some features with both of these brands that sort of go into all areas of gaming. Like the software, like Radeon software, for example, I think is significantly better than the NVIDIA control panel. And that sort of, I do tend to use that relatively often. Like it's just nicer to use to set up features and things. So that's something where you're like, okay, that impacts the overall experience. But for DLSS 3, it's like you may never use it.
That's right.
So yeah, you're just going to have to weigh that up. And it's a case-by-case thing that makes it very difficult to draw big conclusions about. Like anything really, it's like, and it depends on your circumstances and how you use a product.
DLSS 3 frame generation, in my opinion, is heavily overhyped for most gamers. Because I myself would never ever use it. I'd never turn it on because, as I said, I mostly play multiplayer games, mostly competitive multiplayer games. So latency's at a premium, and I want frames. I don't want frame smoothing. I want actual frames with input included. So frame generation is completely useless, whether it comes from AMD in the future or NVIDIA right now. Completely useless for me, and that will apply for not most gamers. That'll apply for a lot of gamers. And then there are a lot of gamers who just don't want a frame smoothing technology. But, it does boost the the frame rate numbers, which is a key selling point on benchmark graphs for NVIDIA because it makes their cards look way faster than maybe they really are. But it's an impressive technology. It's just it's not for everyone or every use case.
And I've used it across a range of different games, and it even comes down to the type of game. Not even just like you could lock two games at a similar frame rate, and even then DLSS 3 has a different impact. Like I found in a game like Cyberpunk, which is first person, that the latency of DLSS 3 sort of made it a bit more rubbery feeling in terms of its almost like mouse smoothing was enabled, as opposed to a game like Hogwarts Legacy, which was third person, and I played that a significant chunk of that with DLSS 3 on just to see what it would be like. And I found that just the style of game made the latency issues feel less impactful, probably because of the third person view. You're not jerking the camera around as much because you've got a wider field of view, so you can generally see more things in that style of game. So again, it really makes a big, it's really hard to draw a conclusion on, because I wouldn't use it in Cyberpunk, but I would consider using it for Hogwarts. And there are other sorts of games where, like Diablo 4, it's in Diablo 4, I believe, but the frame rate in that game's so high, generally on my system anyway, that I wouldn't consider using it. So again, it's very difficult to sort of say you must have that or you must not have that. It's sort of case by case.
There's absolutely going to be people out there who love DLSS 3 and it's great for them. It's a game changer, really improves their game experience. Sure, I fully appreciate that and accept that. But there's also a lot of people who aren't interested in it or it's completely useless to them. So when you're reviewing a product, you have to be mindful that you're reviewing it for some people who could not care less about DLSS 3. It's a complete waste of time for them. And then there are other people who are going to find it really useful. So
exactly.
You have to manage that when you're doing your review.
And I think we're talking about these features. You want to give a very balanced sort of conclusion to that, especially if it's like a case-by-case basis. We don't want to say that everyone should use it, because then you will get users who buy that product specifically for that feature thinking this is going to be the game changer for them. And then they use it and they're like, I'm not as sold on that feature. And that sort of, it takes away from the usefulness of the review. They're going to, that viewer is going to be a bit stung by that sort of conclusion.
Yeah, it's also,
whereas if we sort of give a more balanced feedback based on considering a whole variety of factors, and then it turns out that you love that feature, that's awesome, right? Like you've gotten a great conclusion for yourself. You've seen that we're sort of had this balanced, mixed sort of take on it. Works sometimes, works not as well at other times, and you think it's great. Well, that's awesome. Like that's the ideal outcome basically for you as a viewer of the content. And I think that applies to anything that we make a sort of balanced, mixed opinion on. So yeah, that's DLSS 3 at the moment. Now, hopefully there's ways that they can take it to that next level and make it a really compelling feature for all gamers working across a whole variety of games really well. But it will take a bit of work from here to see what they can do there. So we'll see.